Dun, 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 dun. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Justin, and today I am presenting you my album review of Mike Oldfield's album Tubular Bells, his debut album, released in 1973. And as with most of my album reviews, you can go back in a playlist that I'll link down in the description below and listen to my first reactions to each of the songs on this album, of which there are two, and get my initial thoughts and initial impressions. After spending some quality and solitary time with the album, here are my final thoughts, my album review. Mike Oldfield, 19 years old, pretty much playing every single instrument on the album, bar a few here and there. But listen, this is a historical landmark of an album that shows you what one person, the creative force within one person, not within one band, no, just one 19-year-old guy. Layers upon layers of beautiful, magnificent instruments. And I mean, so many instruments, from organ to guitar to bass to some that I've never even heard of. But in this album, Oldfield creates two monuments of pieces, one monument album that feels like it has its place in history, not only in just general music, but getting into classical music, progressive music, and even ambient and minimalism. I feel I can hear 19 years of musical genius and musical buildup in Mike and just waiting to explode. And in his debut album, he really does let it loose. While the album is presented in two parts, it really is one whole piece. And in each of these pieces, we get scene by scene, play by play direction and segments and pictures that are set into motion with the music. Each segment in the music allows you time to really concentrate and absorb the meaning of it before its direction changes and it shifts you into something completely different, transporting you into a new scene. And just some of the images that I get are like being at a Spanish port by the seaside or walking in snow-frosted landscapes among the forest, among the trees. For an album that's mostly instrumental, Mike sure sets you up with a lot of visuals. It's an extremely varied and engrossing performance, listening to every single instrument that's involved here. Like I said, there's a lot of them. I don't know the name of all of them. But Mike allows each one to have its place, to have its moments, to have something to say. And to me, and I'm sure to most others, most notably in this would be Oldfield's guitar work, which is fantastic really throughout this whole thing. Part of the success of the album is the way that each of these flow from and out of each other. Somehow Mike is always able to keep the music evolving, growing, and fluid as it moves from part to part, even as different as all those parts may seem. And I think that we can all agree on one thing, is that whether you like each segment within the songs, Mike has a way with melody. Mike has a way with musical phrasing. To be able to take different audio colors from different sides of the spectrum and to mix these hues together in a way that the shades go from light to dark, from mellow to sharp, and riffs that are like nice and groovy and heavy into more ambient and just beautiful pieces. He blends them all together so that they make sense and they don't feel out of context or without context. And this is an album that feels more of a journey rather than a mood, because you may settle into one place in the music and then out of nowhere the mood is going to change, some hard guitars are going to kind of break up the ambience of it all. So it feels like something you would listen to with engagement rather than just putting it on the background. And I'll admit that not every single moment introduced feels just right. I'll admit that not every single moment fits perfectly within the scope of the work that Oldfield is doing, especially to me when compared to some of his future works. But it's an album that rewards patience. It's an album that you don't feel like you have to be rushed through, because Mike, I can tell and I feel like he didn't feel like he was being rushed when he was making this album. The first part was completed in about a week, recording-wise, and the second part over the course of 3 months. The opening moments of part 1 are probably his most popular, as it was used in the movie The Exorcist, which I haven't seen, so I have no I have like no connections with that movie to place it with this music. All I can say about the music, especially the beginning, is it's incredibly gentle. It feels like snow just kind of floating in the air before landing in the ground below. And it's just incredibly mystical. It's so relaxing. It's really mystifying. And I would say that goes for really like most of the whole song. These really nice sharp and reoccurring riffs that come in seemingly at odd times, almost like little jump scares, or at least to get your attention, to act like, you know, this isn't going to be completely just dreamy landscapes, you know, there's something more coming. And there's a lot that happens in these songs. And I love how throughout all these layers, as they continue building and building, they eventually just slightly bleed into this miniature crescendo before changing again. And as new beginnings are introduced and old friends are departed, Oldfield continues to have a constant and perpetual motion throughout this song, smartly allowing certain instruments to bleed away and allowing new ones to show their faces. He has a smart way of defining motion and melody, allowing his brand of progressive rock to incorporate moods of ambience while moving into the momentum of a good classical piece. For a great example of this, about 17 minutes into part 1, there's a really cool moment where all the music kind of slows down and the guitar starts a new lead in the background. And eventually, the bass takes over that lead. And then from there, more instruments are starting to layer upon layer upon layer from that new foundation. And it's just a really cool way of building that melody from nothing and eventually using that melody to form motion and to form momentum through the rest of the song, especially into the ending of it. And the ending to part 1 is extremely climactic. It's extremely euphoric. I love the way that Vivian Stanshall, how he announces each of the instruments at the end. It's almost like a final curtain call for all the parts that were played, for all the actors or the musicians, which really is just Mike. It acts as a perfect finale and a perfect closer for part 1 of the album. Incredibly well done. I love that. Part 2, like I said, which was recorded over 3 months, opens with some medieval-like strings that wouldn't sound out of place if you were just chilling in Lumbridge in RuneScape. And slowly more strings and more strings are added. Piano takes over the lead on the melody. There's some gorgeous and light harmonies that come sweeping in, kind of setting you up for a more filled out section to come. And then it's not long before percussion and drums are introduced, which is a really nice surprise, as the album did have percussion elements before, but not purely drums. And I like how monotonous these drums are in their rhythm. We're almost getting a little bit of a precursor into some of the works that Mike would later do, such as on Omadon or even Incantations. And among these drums, we once again have rises and falls within the melodies themselves. It's almost like being led through dark and damp chambers, being led to the end of the road, not knowing if what waits outside is death or life. But no, it's neither. It's a caveman. The caveman is probably one of Mike's most unique sections on the album. Perhaps maybe even in his catalog. For that, I'm not sure. But it's definitely a very surprising section, I'll tell you that. Mike's grunts and his drunken growling and his drunken howling throughout this section adds a little bit of levity to the album, kind of telling you, like, don't take it so seriously, because Mike isn't taking it that seriously. And there's even a moment in there where the caveman vocals kind of respond with a like as piano's introduced, almost like he doesn't know what a piano is. Or maybe he's discovered fire. I don't know. I will admit that while the caveman vocals don't bother me and they don't take away from the music at all to me, I also don't think that they necessarily add anything. So in that kind of case, they're just kind of there. I feel like listening to this album with someone maybe riding in the car with me or next to me, I feel like they'd be with the album pretty much the whole way through, but then as soon as the caveman vocals start, I'm gonna have to explain myself. So it's a bit of an odd choice for him to include it in the music if he had wanted vocals in that section, but like I said, I don't think that it takes away from the music. A bit random, admittedly, but I don't think it's the worst thing ever. And then the song really begins to pick up, the riffs really become bigger and badder, and there's some fantastic guitar soloing that comes out of that, which I guess really the whole album is kind of a solo. And then after the caveman finally leaves his cave, I guess you could say, we're introduced to a little bit of momentary bliss with the organ, the guitar. It's absolutely beautiful and sublime the way that they are built out of this, really setting you up for a nice minimalistic and somewhat ambient piece to follow, especially after the tumultuous section that came before it. This is a really nice reprieve. Ambient guitars that are just layering and layering on top of each other. The thought, the tone, the feeling, the technique, all of them come together. And once again, I reiterate that Mike is a master of melody. As we're drawn and lulled into this, well, we got the sailor's hornpipe. Gone are these beautiful and sublime tones, traded in for a little bit of the sailor's hornpipe, a little bit of Popeye action. And this section does come out of nowhere once again. I don't think that it sounds bad. I mean, it sounds good for what it is, but after such a beautiful moment that preceded it, like I was really into that, the sailor's hornpipe section, it does throw you off a little bit. I get that Mike wanted to end on a more fun note, perhaps. I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it. Because the way that it was ending beforehand, I thought was a perfect and succinct ending. The actual ending, Sailor's Hornpipe, I don't know. Barring that, awesome songs, great album, really good stuff. You can tell just how historical it is, especially to the modern world. But like, think about 1973, 19 years old. This is crazy. This feels like a once in a lifetime kind of event and kind of work. Let's move on to my favorite lyrics, my favorite moment in the album, and my song rankings, which will be incredibly easy. My favorite lyrics are the introduction of the instruments in part 1. Listen, I love Stanishaw's delivery in there. I love his tone, his actual voice, the way that he announces it. I love the way that the instruments come in. I know this isn't exactly favorite lyrics, but even though the lyrics may not have like a certain emotional value, I actually feel they do, because for a mostly instrumental piece, these are the few words that are actually spoken on the album. And what are they there to do? To further enunciate and emphasize the instruments. That's awesome. And it sounds great. I think it's awesome. He has a certain stature in his voice as he calls out for a curtain call. Just a final bow for all of the instruments, for all the parts they played, like I mentioned before. Fantastic send-off, especially for part 1. My favorite moment on the album is the exact same thing for the exact same reasons that I just listed. There are a lot of standout moments on the album, but as I come back to it, and I come back to it, and I listen to the album over and over again, I look forward to the curtain call of the instruments. I'm here for it. And then my song ranking for the album, part 1, part 2. I actually think they're both really, really strong. I do find part 1 a little more consistent in its efforts, even though part 2 has a few more higher highs for me. I do feel like the low parts are just a little bit lower. So all in all, it's perfectly balanced. I think it's a perfectly balanced album, but I do find myself just slightly preferring part 1 overall. Slightly. So at this exact moment of the review, I've heard a few more of Mike Oldfield's future albums. So while this one isn't my favorite album thus far of his catalog, I don't think that you can deny just the masterwork of an album and of music that it is, and deny its place in history to the achievements that Mike's done with this creation. Showing the boundless and energetic creativity of a 19-year-old guy who had free creative reign when it was given to him, and who took risk, who didn't hold back, who allowed his creativity to blossom and to come out fully formed into the album that is Tubular Bells. Anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed my album review. Of course, like I said before, you can go back and watch my initial thoughts and my initial reactions to each of the parts here. You can also join me on Twitter. I randomly post stuff every once in a while. You can let me know your favorite moments and lyrics on the album. It's either going to be, you know, introducing Tubular Bells, or it's going to be blah, blah, blah. You can also support the channel on Patreon, but you don't have to. As long as you've enjoyed the video, enjoyed my company, I've enjoyed yours, and I hope that you're having a fantastic day, guys. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.